Shai Gilgeous-Alexander was picked 11th overall in the 2018 NBA draft, and this is one of those cases where I'm not sure it feels like he fell or teams missed him. There's a lot that goes into it. As we now know, it was a very deep draft. A lot of the picks that came before him were somewhat justified, at least for the time, and if it wasn't because of talent, it was because of the fit with the team. B, he really apparently did not work out for many teams. As a matter of fact, around 2018, the information you would find was that he hadn't worked out for anyone at all, but after doing this video, I saw that the New York Knicks were actually able to bring him in. So you do wonder who else, but for the information that's out there, there just weren't very many workouts. And so he was projected to go around the 8 to 11 range, and that's where he went. Still, given where he currently is with the Thunder, the level that he's playing at, what the future seems to hold, it is fun to go back and see where the players that were picked before him are now, how their careers going, and maybe what it would have been like if Shai had went to any one of these teams. And if you want to see what it's like to make money off sports, now you can with MyBookie. Make your March Madness a moneymaker with MyBookie. Getting started is easy. Visit MyBookie online and use promo code DOM2K to receive a deposit bonus up to $1,000. Grab your extra funds now, and for a limited time, claim a free entry into the 150,000 MyBookie Madness bracket contest for a chance at big money. If you're the type of guy who likes to fill out multiple brackets to get an advantage, you can do that too. The price of entry is less than an Uber, all for a shot at a life-changing amount of money. With so many brands to choose from, you need a platform that makes it simple to bet and win like MyBookie. Bet anything, anytime, anywhere with MyBookie. Selecting DeAndre Ayton at number 1 was considered the safe pick for a Suns team that couldn't really afford to mess up. Even if they had have gone a different direction, there were numerous choices ahead of Shai Gilgeous they would have gone with. Ayton's career has been confusing because on one hand, he hasn't been totally disappointing with a career average of a double-double, and the starting center on a finals team just 3 years after he was drafted. On the other, it does completely feel like he could be better than he is by now. More aggressive, more dominant, and overall just more impactful, seeing as how he doesn't so much as have an all-star appearance next to his name yet. It feels like he's still on the Suns a bit against his will at this point, but he's in a great situation with Kevin Durant joining the club for a second title push. I, however, fully believe his time with this team is limited. Seeing the position the Suns have been in over the last few years, and considering playstyles, I can't be that curious of a Shai Gilgeous-Booker pairing. There is a catch to that I'm going to get to at the end of this section though. Shai did have to develop quite a bit to get to the point that he's currently at, and I believe that stint where he got to play with Chris Paul early on really helped him, so I'm not sure at that time a backcourt next to Booker would have been ideal for either of them. On top of that, had they taken Shai, there's very little chance they would have brought CP3 along, which eventually resulted in a finals appearance. That's the catch though. I'm gonna touch on this for a later team, but there was a chance the Suns were about to get Shai Gilgeous and Ayton. Robert Sarver nixed that, and they ended up getting Mikal Bridges, and yeah, that core after they added Chris Paul ended up going to the finals in 2021, so you can't really knock it, but it is very interesting to realize they could have definitely had Shai and Ayton in one night. That's the timeline I'm more curious about. The Kings nabbed Marvin Bagley at the second spot when any of the next 3 picks would have served them better. To be fair, he had an impressive run at Duke and absolutely seemed like the type of versatile big that would excel in today's game. Not only that, but he was viewed as the ideal big to run the floor with De'Aaron Fox, which was a main reason he was selected over even Luka Doncic. Of course, this just didn't pan out how the Kings imagined, and he was moved within a few years to Detroit, where he's currently having a very quiet season. I was encouraged by the little bit he got to play with Cade Cunningham last season, but of course he's missed nearly all of year 2, so they haven't gotten to build on that, and the Pistons took another big in the draft, which sort of leaves Bagley in an awkward position. It remains to be seen where he can have the best impact, as he's had flashes to show he can at least be a solid NBA player in my opinion. As stated before, having Fox, at the time, another guard or a ball handler just wasn't what they were looking for in the draft, and I didn't even like it years later when they had Halliburton and Fox running the backcourt, so I don't feel like we missed anything here. Still, it's hilarious that Shai is like one of 6 players to turn out better than what Sacramento picked. At number 3, the situation that I consider the gift that just keeps on giving. Atlanta selecting Luka Doncic to trade him for Trae Young immediately. For the purposes of this video, since it's the Hawks, we'll talk about Trae here. People got down on him quickly given his poor summer summer league performance and rough start to his rookie season. It's safe to say by now that Ice Trae has figured it out, becoming one of the best point guards in the league and one of the first new age players to mimic the range of Damian Lillard and Steph Curry. He's a legendary offensive engine and nearly had the Hawks in the NBA Finals by year 3 before they really had the roster for it, in my opinion. At this point, the only question Atlanta may have is whether they can surround him with enough talent to keep him happy in the coming years. But even trading Doncic for him hasn't proved to be some fatal mistake. Your pick has to be phenomenal to not regret moving Luka on draft night. So yeah, given the time that it took for Shai to get where he's currently at, and what Trae has accomplished in that same time, I just don't think there's room for a big what if here. Memphis went with the defensive stalwart Jaren Jackson Jr. with the 4th pick at a time when they weren't all the way done with their old core. Due to that fact, they still had Michael Conley on the roster filling their point guard position and were looking specifically for some defensive juice. They believe they got that with their picks that night, and so far they were correct, as Jackson is currently in fantastic position to take home Defensive Player of the Year. On top of that, the Grizzlies finished their rebuild rather quickly, selecting Ja Morant the very next year after moving on from Conley, and aside from the off-the-court shenanigans, it's hard to imagine they aren't happy with this. So once again, thinking about Shai on the Grizzlies is kind of pointless. The Grizzlies got what they needed year by year and are very much on the way to contending for years to come. That's if the off-court stuff goes away, and maybe even some of the on-court stuff. As we said we'd revisit, Dallas originally selected Trae Young and moved him for potentially one of the greatest players of all time. Luka Doncic might be the first player I thought was well on his way to the Hall of Fame before ever playing an NBA game. He's been an all-star every year of his career outside of his rookie season, has taken his team to the conference finals just like Trae before I think the roster was actually ready for it, and is currently on pace to record a near top 20 season scoring average of all time. Despite that, he's falling into the trap a lot of great players face, willing his team to a record that's too good to get better draft picks, but not with a team that's good enough to win a championship. To help with this, the Mavs made a last-ditch effort in trading for Kyrie recently, and it's just not working out, so stay tuned for updates on the whereabouts of Luka in the coming years. Still, that draft night deal gave them one of the greatest pieces a team could ask for, and if they're able to put the right unit around him, they've easily got a contender. With that being known, I just don't think there's currently a world in which they wish they had Shai in his place. Mo Bamba landed with the Magic at pick 6. Expectations? A ceiling featuring a Joel Embiid level offensive game with possible Defensive Player of the Year bids in the future. Reality? A song named after him that nobody plays anymore. With the physical attributes and scouting reports, it's not hard to see why Orlando was excited about him. Sadly, it just never came together for more than a few solid stretches at a time, eventually resulting in the recent trade sending him to the Lakers. While there were some encouraging flashes early on there, he remains out with an injury and no guarantee that we'll get to see him build on it in the playoffs. Given Orlando's guard play at the time and how Bamba turned out, this is one of the few teams so far that probably wish they had Shai's services. Still, the Magic simply don't have a solid track record of development, so it feels like that would have only lasted a short time before he was moved, or just being part of some big logjam that held back his potential. Also fair to mention, Markelle Fultz finally seems to be on track currently along with an enticing core, so they're probably not thinking too hard about it. At least for the moment, the future is bright. The Chicago Bulls took the next big man up at number 7 with Wendell Carter Jr., hoping to tighten up some loose ends with what they were building. The center position was one of the few spots they didn't have a hopeful future prospect in, and the thought was that he'd fit well with budding star Lauri Markkanen as they could play off of each other. Carter unfortunately didn't last long because by 2021, Chicago saw a fair chance at a contending roster, so he was shipped off to Orlando. He's looked pretty promising for the Magic as a much younger and presumably better option than Vucevic for the future. Meanwhile, Chicago is just barely hanging on to the gamble they took as injuries prevented them from ever fully reaching contention. Given what happened to Chris Dunn, coupled with the fact that Chicago would likely have to think about a rebuild in the near future, it probably does spark thought about what it would have been like to throw Shai on top of what they were building. Still, the Bulls saw opportunity to fast track what they had back then, so they probably would have done something similar regardless. Colin Sexton went to a confusing Cavaliers squad at 8 and has had a fascinating career arc. He was a higher rated prospect than Shai, so he was likely going above him anyways, but there were also reports that Shai did not want to play for the Cavaliers, so that may have deterred them from that choice. Seeing as how nobody knew what LeBron was going to do or what the roster would look like, it was fair for no one to want to deal with that situation. Sexton even kind of awkwardly lobbied for LeBron to stay after being asked about it on draft night. With LeBron eventually skipping town, Sexton actually had a few successful seasons for the Cavs, living up to the pick as the rebuild ensued. Unfortunately for him, as the roster took more shape and he he got injured, he became expendable as the Cavaliers looked to put the finishing touches on to make them contenders. Thus, he was one of the pieces sent to the Jazz once Donovan Mitchell's time was up, and he currently resides there on a fairly successful rebuilding project in year 1. Had the Cavs have went the Shai route for whatever reason, he'd probably have had plenty of opportunity to blossom with the roster LeBron left behind, perhaps becoming an even stronger engine than the one they have now. Yet, because they just clinched their first playoff berth without LeBron since 1998, have drafted well since, and are literal contenders in the current day, this likely doesn't feel like a miss. Plus, to become contenders as fast as they have since 2018, they probably would have needed to trade Shai at some point anyways. And we've reached the Fortnite jacket portion of this video. As much as I've loved that game, if there was any indication this was gonna go south, it was indeed that jacket. The Knicks selected Kevin Knox at 9, which was their 3rd lottery pick since 2015. He had a monster summer league, and his rookie season actually wasn't all that bad. But as the years went on, his limited offensive game combined with the lackluster defense led to him falling out of the rotation as New York became more competitive. It especially is not hard to fall out of a Tibbs rotation. Ever since 2021, he's kind of been bounced around from team to team with no clear indication that things will get better. He's only 23 years old, but unless he finds some contributing role on a semi-important team rather quickly, it's not looking great. To wrap this section up, he was also teammates with Shai at Kentucky. New York was one of the few teams that got to bring Shai in for a workout, but ultimately they preferred Knox's size and apparent shooting ability. Although New York has found some marginal success in the last couple of seasons led by Julius Randle and now combined with Jalen Brunson, I'm going to guess missing Shai kind of hurt, especially with the fact that it was due to Knox. As a matter of fact, after missing out on the Donovan Mitchell trade, talks turned to packages they could offer for Shai should he become available. Had they have drafted him originally, there was plenty of time and space for him to develop, as he likely would have been the focal point. They probably still end up being able to build something close to what they have now, except with a younger guard possessing more superstar potential, which would no doubt have made them more enticing to potential free agents. Still, in the present day, I would venture to say they're only about 1 or 2 pieces away, so it's not all bad. At number 10, Mikal Bridges to Philly, and admittedly this probably would be even more fascinating to talk about in 2 or so years given recent events. The Sixers immediately moved him to the Suns for Zaire Smith and the Heat's 2021 first round pick. This one has to feel insane for Philly, who could have used either Bridges or Shai and yet wound up with barely any of Zaire Smith over 2 seasons. Meanwhile, Bridges was the total opposite of that, as he's never missed a game aside from when he was traded to the Nets, which doesn't even count, and had previously been a vital piece of the Suns' title run. His offensive game was already expanding before the trade, but now being the focal point of the offense in Brooklyn, he's averaged 27 points a game on 50% from the field and 41% from 3 in 20 games. Fans have begun to invoke the name of James Harden in reference to the time that he was traded from a contending situation and immediately broke out. It'll be interesting to see how much further he can take it when teams are specifically game planning around him next season, but the potential was surely always there and is now being fully realized. It's funny enough that the Sixers really missed both Bridges and Shai here, but as mentioned earlier, the Suns general manager at the time actually tried to trade for Shai before landing Bridges. They really needed a point guard, but when Robert Sarver caught wind that Philly was offering up Bridges, he pushed for that deal instead. Initially, that played out poorly, but of course the Suns then developed late on in 2020 and added Chris Paul shortly after. Considering where the roster is today, for the moment it's technically all worked out. The Sixers could have definitely used Shai as a shooting guard and secondary ball handler next to Ben Simmons at the time, or even as a flat-out alternative in later years, given what we know happens. They could have used Bridges before trading for Jimmy Butler, but they made those go-for-it moves, creating one of their most talented rosters ever during the 2019 season, so they were in full win-now mode regardless. That left Shai Gilgeous-Alexander to fall to the Charlotte Hornets at 11, where he was promptly traded to the Clippers that same night. Still having a top guard in Kemba Walker at the time, Charlotte felt they needed a wing more so than another one, and they made the move. To be fair, before Miles Bridges caught off-court issues, things were working out and the future seemed bright for them. Even today, they've got their point guard for what they hope to be the future, so it's not all terrible. The same could maybe be said for the Clippers, who probably don't lose a ton of sleep over Shai, given that A, he might not have developed the same there, and B, that trade really landed them both Paul George and Kawhi Leonard. Not just PG. The Clippers curse simply refuses to let that pairing be successful, but I think they would make that trade again. I think anybody on the planet would make that trade in 2019 if it was going to land them 2 of the most coveted players in the league at the same time. But of course, these things are fun to look back at because in 2023, Shai Gilgeous is one of the most coveted young superstars in the league. He's got a game that's hard to describe. I often find myself thinking it's like a basketball anime, because one second he's here, the next he's there, and he's created a whole lot of space. He plays at his own pace, and it's really unlike any of the other offensive superstars in the league. With his situation in OKC and how even at this point they've got a chance at the playoffs, they did that without their #1 overall pick in Chet Holmgren. Still, they've managed to have a lot of nice young pieces, and I could easily see a world where, because of that, they're contending in somewhere within the next 3 years or so. For now, the Thunder have seemingly avoided all the trade talks. For a second, it seemed like Shai just was not going to match the timeline, but it seems that things are working out fine. I very much enjoy watching him play, and if you enjoyed watching this video, be sure to hit the like button. Also, if you haven't already, please sub because we are very close to 400k, and when you're done, hit the bell next to my name if you want notifications every time a new video drops. Appreciate you watching, and I'll see you all on the next one.